Hello and welcome to Line of Mouse Commentary. I'm Holland and this is my best friend Tori.
Hi.
If you're new to our show, we rank various forms of entertainment out of a total score of 10 with only 2 points allowed for our personal taste. Don't worry, we break down everything as we go. Feel free to agree, disagree, or find something new to enjoy. Just be sure to tread lightly, there will be hot takes and spoilers ahead. Cut to the intro. I feel like I do really well with that.
I'm so bad at that. So
maybe eventually I'll just do all the intros and then.
Oh, I like doing that.
I know.
I'm just not as good.
It's okay.
I have other strengths.
Yes, like doing all the editing.
Yeah.
And all the filming and everything else that keeps us running. So I'm just like the passenger princess of this podcast. Not really. So if you couldn't read our title, we are on episode 10 of season 4. Welcome back from our holiday break.
Hope you had lovely holidays.
Had a wonderful holiday season. Christmas, Thanksgiving, all the
Halloween.
fun things. Yeah. So we're back from now until pretty much the end of April.
Yep.
So, and then we take another break. So, if you couldn't tell from the title or if you're listening only, we are covering the Redwall TV show today, episodes 1 through 4. So if you are not familiar with the book, or if you're looking for a review of the book, you can click back a few episodes. We did review the book for prior episodes, and I wanted to have kind of a continuation this season and have Tori experience the book, and then the TV show with me. So this was familiar to me. I watched the TV show as a kid, but this was new to Tori. So you could be in the boat of either of us if you grew up with this show. So I have some background info on this show that I will go through. And then if you'd like to click off and don't want any spoilers, then you can do so and watch it and then come back and review it with us. So the Redwall animated television series, also known as Brian Jakes' Redwall, was a 3-season adaptation of Redwall, Matameo, and Martin the Warrior. Those are 3 separate books. And it was originally broadcast from 1999 until 2002. It was produced by Nelvana, a Canadian animation studio, and the series airs reruns on some PBS channels in the US and occasionally airs on Teletoon in Canada. Each episode is around 22 minutes in length, or 30 minutes with commercials. The entire series has a total of 39 episodes, and season 1, I believe, has 13 episodes total. Nelvana co-founder Topper Taylor was a fan of the Redwall series and successfully negotiated for the rights. The Redwall TV series was officially greenlit in October 1998. At the time, Nelvana co-CEO Michael Hirsch stated that Redwall has all the elements of a medieval fairy tale. Brian Jakes was consulted on the story, and he attended production meetings in Toronto and Los Angeles. Production was led by creator, developer, and writer Steve Roberts. Originally, PBS declined to distribute the series over concerns of violence for younger audiences. However, the target demographic was school-aged kids. So Nelvana worked with the American Public Television Association to distribute Redwall as a free program offer as part of the PBS Bookworm Bunch, and achieved approximately 70% carriage rate on PBS stations across the US. Brian Jakes introduced the PBS episodes for the first 2 seasons, which generally included an educational featurette that offered a lesson on an aspect of the show, as well as a featured character and viewer question segment, which was filmed at Spec Hall in Liverpool. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. Later featurettes highlighted voice actors and crew members and would sometimes include 7th and 8th grade students in the Los Angeles area. These were never included in DVD or home video releases. The first Redwall TV series aired September 12th, 1999, and the final episode was aired on February 19th, 2001. The TV series aired the first episode in the US on April 1st, 2001. The series finale aired in the US on July 28th, 2002. So that's like a 3-year gap between original release and airing in the US.
Yeah.
A 4th season was originally planned, however, the show was canceled for a planned film adaptation that was not produced. So here's the synopsis of episode 1. So the 4 episodes we're reviewing are going to be Episode 1, Clooney the Scourge Part 1. Episode 2 is Clooney the Scourge Part 2. Episode 3 is called Treachery. And Episode 4 is called Spara's Kingdom. And here's a synopsis of Episode 1. If you want to click off now, you can. But this does have a little bit of a spoiler of the overall plot of the show as well. Matthias the Mouse is orphaned when the vile rat Clooney the Scourge destroys his town. Adopted by the generous creatures of Redwall Abbey, he grows up to admire their legendary protector, Martin the Warrior. But his peaceful young life is shattered when the Abbey is attacked by rats and Matthias meets their warlord, none other than Clooney. Matthias resolves to fight the tyrant that once again threatens his life and his new family. So, there you have it. That's kind of the overall plot of the show as well. So, we are going to kick into our first category. So, Tori's going to start us off.
Okay, so with TV shows, our first category is plot, story, and cohesion. This includes resolution through a season. And if we were to be talking about later or last seasons, we could also potentially talk about resolution as a whole for the series. From what I understand, the first season of this show, even though it has 3 seasons, the first season is the one that adapted the book Redwall, the book titled Redwall, which, like Holland mentioned, we just recently covered. So if you want to go back a few episodes, if you're interested in Redwall, if you're a Redwall fan, that is our discussion of the original source material. This is an adaptation of that. So I gave this out of 2 possible points. I gave this 1 point out of 2. It sounds harsh, but just stick with me. I've talked about the plot a lot in that past episode, so I'm not trying to rehash too much of those points because honestly, I don't see there a lot wrong with the plot. There are other aspects of the storytelling that I didn't care for in this adaptation. So it all basically boiled down to how it was adapted, not necessarily what the core of the story is.
Which in our scoring sheet, if you want to go onto our website and look over it, we do have a little bullet that we have bullets that kind of jog our memories of what we can cover. And we agreed in creating our scoring system, you can consider how faithfully something is adapted from the source material, or you can see this as its own concept, and that's up to the interpretation of the reviewer. So Tori's considering that in her review, and it's perfectly legal in our our world,
in our scoring world.
Yeah. So
I think because both the book and the show were brand new to me, and we just covered the book, it is so fresh in my mind. And because of that, all of the differences that were changed are so glaring to me. Now, if I had read the book, or if I had watched this show as a kid and then read the book for the first time recently, I don't think I would notice the changes as starkly as I do now. But just the timing of how we've prepped for this has given me a perspective on how much actually got shifted. So, before I go much into that, they do include, and I thought it was very good, they create a backstory for Matthias and how he came to the Abbey that does not exist in, as far as I know, the canon of any book of the Redwall series. It's just something, in the book, Matthias has just been there since he was small, and that's the explanation you're given, and you don't really need more than that. But for the case of the show, I think that the backstory that they gave him is fine and good, and it adds a little bit more, I guess, depth to not just Matthias's background, but also the background of Clooney and how ruthless he really is, and he's been doing this for a long time, kind of thing. Because from what I understand, when the story of Redwall picks up, Matthias has been at the Abbey for 10 years. So for at least 10 years, Clooney has been destroying homes and families and livelihoods. So this guy has been a bad guy for a long time. It's not a new development. So I think those aspects of the storytelling that are newly created for this work perfectly fine. I have no issues with them. I actually think they have a little bit of a positive, and I think they kind of help from a viewer standpoint, because these episodes are so fast. This will piggyback into my next points. Because these episodes are so fast and quick, and they've condensed a lot into a small amount of time, I think that taking those extra minutes that they did to create a backstory for Matthias actually helps garner a bit of sympathy or rooting for him as a viewer, especially from a child standpoint. If I was oh my gosh, this big nasty rat just harmed this little baby rat's family. Like, when you're 8, that's a huge deal, like you just automatically root for and despise, and obviously that it's still the same effect, but from an emotional standpoint, it's a good way to grip a young audience. So I thought that was really good. Now, the pacing, I circled the word pacing. I don't know if you can see this. And next to it, I wrote zoom, because we are flying through this story. The Book of Redwall is pretty chunky for a young kid's reader. I would say the target demographic for Redwall is probably like 9 to 14, but that's still a pretty chunky book for that age range. Now, I wouldn't say it's like a difficult book. We've already talked about this, so again, I'm not trying to like rehash that, but there's a lot covered in a lot of pages for a lot of characters, and the story feels big and grand and like it takes its time in a way that doesn't feel draggy. But with the adaptation, the pacing is so insanely fast, and they take plot sections and they have rearranged the order that they happen in. If I had no knowledge of the book, I wouldn't know. So I wouldn't consider this as a negative at all. But again, because I have such a fresh knowledge of the story, I was getting really confused about why are things from the end of Act 2 or the beginning of Act 3 in the book happening in Episode 2 or Episode 3 of a 13 episode season. It seemed confusing because now I'm thinking ahead instead of just enjoying what I'm watching. I'm thinking ahead, well then what are they going to do with the third act of the show if all of these third act like actions are happening so early? So I haven't watched that far yet. I haven't watched past Episode 4 as of this recording to prep for this. So now I'm like confused, like how are they going to fill the hole? That's what my head is thinking now, which because of that, I consider it a slight negative, and I'm sure it does its thing and it resolves. But for somebody who knows the book so well, I feel like they could think similarly to me. Like, why is this happening so early? Why is Matthias even present during this thing? That's what, like, there's a siege on the abbey that happens in the book, and Matthias is not even present. He's off handling something else. He's on his little quest. And yet in the show, it happened in like Episode 2 or 3, and he was there and contributed. It's not like he was pointless or whatever, but it just made it feel a little different. 50 plus pages are condensed into like 20 minutes or less. A good example of this is Episode 4, which deals with the Sparrow Kingdom. That's a huge chunk of that book, and they pressed it all into 22 minutes. And because of this, the relationship that Matthias establishes with like the King Sparrow and Warbeak and her mother, whose name escapes me, Dunfeather?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Something like that.
He has a relationship with them, and it also, that section of the book, it really gives you an insight on how clever Matthias can be, and we lose a lot of that like build and a lot of that understanding of the world of the sparrows because everything is squashed. It also makes the motivations of the change in opinion that Warbeak and Dunfeather end up having, where they are enemies of Matthias at first and then have a change of heart and are allies by the end. It felt so quick that it's hard to understand the motivation of why they would change their mind because not much time is given to see the trust built or rationalization happening. There's not enough, this is an example of there's not enough exposition for me to understand what's going on in your head. And so all of a sudden, it just feels like this young sparrow girl, she doesn't really know what she wants, or doesn't really know how she feels, or might be a little naive to trust, which is not actually the case of the character of Warbeak. We talked about her previously, but in the episode that is the Sparrow focused, by the end of the episode, I was very unsatisfied because it felt like a lot of their good moments to shine were kind of taken away for the sake of time. Now, does a 10-year-old viewer care? Probably not as much, but I did think it was worth noting. There is overall cohesion. I don't want to make it sound like that the adaptation is messy, because it's really not. And it was quite entertaining to watch. Like, it was not like I was sitting there having a bad time or thinking that this was being poorly done or poorly told. I'm just seeing that pockets of the storytelling and world building that made the Book of Redwall feel so grand and epic are missing from the adaptation. And I genuinely think it comes down to just the condensation of time. Now, my opinion may change in future episodes as I continue to watch. So I guess I'll circle back to it perhaps. But in these first 4 episodes, this pacing makes decisions of characters feel less clear. And I don't really think that's a character problem. I think it's a fact that we aren't given the opportunity to understand how these characters think differently, and how a lot of the differences in motivations, even just like environmental factors, can play a part in how this character builds the world or story of another character. I know it feels like I'm talking a lot about character notes, but I think that the aspects of the characters are attributing way more to the story not feeling quite as fleshed out as its original source does. That's really all I have to say about plot. I guess I could go through the plot a little bit, but it's, your introduction of your characters, the introduction of your villain in the first 2 episodes. And then we have like our first siege on Redwall in episode 3. And then we have, we got to find all of, Martin the Great's things. So let's start doing that. And that's what leads into the Sparrow stuff. So it just, again, it feels very fast and a little out of order. And it could be a little disorienting for somebody who knows the book really well. So 1 point out of 2.
Okay, so I actually also gave this 1 point out of 2. So I do agree with a lot of your points in how this show does differ from the book. But I would say, I think objectively, they're valid critiques. Personally, it doesn't bother me because I did grow up watching the TV show. So I do think that objectively, though, it does factor into, is this a faithful adaptation or not? My kind of thought process of maybe why they flipped some of the timeline around, I think it helps adapt it keeps our protagonist in the action of the show. So in the book, and this is not a huge spoiler, but in the book, Matthias goes on a quest to find the weapons of Martin the Warrior, specifically his sword, so that he can come back and defend the Abbey and try and defeat Clooney. That's his goal. That's his reason for finding Martin's sword. And while he is on his little quest, the Abbey is under siege. And so in the book, it cuts back and forth between the Abbey being under siege, Clooney's crew of villains, and then Matthias on his quest. And so we have this kind of 3 different perspectives. And I think that for a young audience in an extremely condensed show, that would get very confusing. I think that a TV show like Avatar: The Last Airbender, where you have 26 episodes in a first season, you can kind of cut back and forth between characters. You just have you have twice the time in 26 22-minute episodes versus 13 22-minute episodes. So I thought maybe they wanted to keep Matthias as our protagonist in the action, so they kept him in there when all the siege stuff is happening, as that's kind of building throughout the book. We just kind of put it on the front end to help give us the stakes of the conflict, that these rats are, coming up with all these different plans. They're trying to climb over the wall. They're trying to dig under the ground. Like, oh my gosh, they're really crafty. These foxes have come in and they've injured somebody, and which is a big difference from the book. This is a major spoiler. Like, the foxes only injured Methuselah. Methuselah didn't die from their kind of venturing in. So we have these first, like, 3-4 episodes with all this act 2 and 3 activity happening, and we've kept Matthias in that action as our protagonist so that a viewer and a young audience can follow. And I think for a book, you have way more room for nuance and complexity, that this is a multicast of characters and we can follow all of them. We can follow the entire Abbey crew during the siege, and then we can follow Matthias and his crew while they're traveling. And I think we just don't have the time to get enough buy-in from a viewer, especially with a young audience, in such a short amount of time to buy into the Abbey cast of characters as a whole. So we have to keep Matthias as our kind of point of view throughout the story. So that's just my thought process on the why behind it. Now, I do think that it works very well if that is the intent, but if you're coming from fresh off of reading the book, it does feel like everything is happening very fast, and a lot of that richness and nuance of the story is lost in such a short adaptation. And I think that, so I think it's kind of a pro and a con. So I couldn't quite give it full points because I also think that the plot has a lot going on, and we're trying to simplify it for a short time frame and for a young audience and in an animated TV show medium, but it doesn't have the same richness of some other TV shows. Just as an example, you can go listen to our episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender Season 1. They cover a ton of content and really rich, robust concepts for an older audience in the same time frame of 4 22-minute episodes. They can cover more ground in 4 episodes than I think what Redwall covers in 4 episodes. And I think you can objectively say, well, it's for a different age, it's for a different TV platform, it's public television versus cable TV network, it's a younger audience versus maybe a more like 12 to 14-year-old. This may be like a 10 to 12-year-old audience. So I think you can argue for the justification behind it. I'm not negating the reasoning. But I think objectively, you look at a show like Avatar: The Last Airbender and the amount of meat that you can sink your teeth into in 4 episodes, and this just doesn't have the same caliber. So I think objectively, that's the biggest reason I didn't give it full points, but I do think there are a lot of positives in how this is adapted. I think Matthias' backstory, I agree. I think it gives us a great focal point for our character. It tells not just who Matthias is, as our protagonist and set him up to be our protagonist, but it also sets up Clooney as a villain and his impact of his villainy and kind of murderousness and raiding in a relatable way to a young audience without being overly graphic or overly violent. I think that Redwall being under siege, that whole concept is very easy to follow. I think for a really young audience of like 7 or 8-year-olds, understanding a siege is a little difficult, versus 2 armies running towards each other on a battlefield. I think that also making it very clear, a very clear distinction that Clooney is a villain, while I think for a lot of young audiences may look at his character design and think he's kind of a cool looking guy with a cool hook, barb on his tail, and he's got an eye patch. Like, some kids might find that appealing, but we've set him up at the beginning to be a very like dark villain, and that this is not a guy you want to root for. I think that the nice balance of the villains being threatening and also being kind of these bumbling goons is balanced really nicely, and the fact that the goons are so bumbling allows us to have a little bit of exposition and insight into what Clooney's plan is and what he's doing. Because he's having to explain things to his lackeys, he's also portraying that information to the audience so that they can follow what's going on. Like I said, I like that Methuselah is injured, but he's not dying. I think it'd be way too early to kill him off, even though that happens in Act 3 in the book, to keep him alive and still an influential character early in the show, I think is important. Overall, the external conflict of this show is very much an action adventure, like an epic tale. There really isn't a lot of character depth and development, and we don't have the time to get into that either. And I think that the show overall sets up for you that you are going to get this like fantasy, not fairy tale per se, but this fantasy epic, more like Lord of the Rings style, versus a dramatic character-driven piece. And so I think the way that the story is presented sets you up for those expectations and then delivers on those expectations very well. I do think that creates this vacuum of character development, which I'll talk about in characters, but I do think it also is a positive in that the plot delivers what it's setting you up to expect in the story. There were a couple things that I felt like were a little goofy just because it happened so quickly. The fact that the Vole family is taken captured and Matthias all of a sudden is just like sneaking out of the Abbey, and Cornflower's like, I won't tell anybody, I'll keep your secret. It took me a minute in watching it as an adult. I had to stop and think for a minute. Is he already sneaking out to go find Martin the Warrior's sword? And then I was like, oh, no. He's going to find the Vole family and rescue them. And then he meets Basil Staghair and they have that part of the story. But it took me a minute because I was like, this is moving so fast. Have we already just pushed him on his quest in episode 2 or 3? And I was like, oh, no, we haven't. So that was a little bit just a consequence of that rapid pace. And then another thing that I thought was a very goofy consequence of the pace is we have the Abbey under siege. These villains are here. The abbot is very clear that no, I don't want any fighting. None whatsoever. Like, no, we are peaceful, no fighting. And then in almost the next scene, there are all these mice shooting arrows off of the
Abbey
parapets.
Yeah.
And there's otters in like full out uniforms and shields, and it looks great, but I'm like, we just said no fighting and now we have a trained army.
Right.
And so again, it's just a consequence of that rapid pacing. And while I think a 7-year-old is not going to care that it happens so quickly, I think a 10-year-old that read the book might be a little confused, or a 12-year-old that read the book and loved it is gonna walk away a little dissatisfied. And I do think it does objectively lack a little bit more substance that I think it should have been given from the book. And I understand that, we have to pace things differently for a child audience. We have to pace things differently for public television, and we're only given a very limited, contract of episodes. And so I completely understand for a studio that you don't want to plan to have a 26 episode season and then you only get 13 and now you never actually got to finish the story. So I totally understand that and can respect the decisions that are made, but I do think objectively it doesn't quite meet the mark of a faithful adaptation, and it doesn't quite meet the mark of the caliber of quality that a TV show, and like an epic adventure TV show for this kid's audience can be. So for that reason, I couldn't give it full credit. So I thought half credit was pretty fair. I enjoyed it. I think it's a well done plot. The plot's bones and structure are really good. I think it's very engaging for a young audience. I think the pacing keeps kids really engaged and motivated to continue watching. The pauses between episodes are really good. I think the recap of each episode is really good, but it's not top tier. I would say it's a good, solid, like mid-tier as far as plot goes. So 1 out of 2.
All right. Okay, so our second category in TV shows is characters, and we allot up to 3 points for this, and I'm giving it 1.5 points. So again, half credit. Everything that's great about these characters is all of the things that were great about them before. It's not that anybody has necessarily changed what they are at the core or their function, but with this adaptation, a lot of the best nuances of these characters are unfortunately lost. And so again, this kind of comes down to like an adaptation error, I think. However, I think the physical designs of everybody fits the book descriptions so wonderfully. Matthias looks like how he is described. Father Abbott looks like how he is described. Constance the Badger looks like how she is described. Everybody looks like how they were pictured in my head. And I was talking to Holland about this while we were watching it, and I was like, I don't know if I just have a vague memory of the show, and so when I was reading the book, they looked like this in my head, or if the adaptation follows the book description so closely. And Holland's opinion was that it was the latter, that the book is so good at detailing how these characters look that it's easy to adapt them into a physical, visual character. And I thought that was just so wonderful. All of the strengths, I think, of these characters are still present. Formal still is very clearly like master digger, and he's in charge of everything underground, and he's running his operation like, you know, the Navy, and like all of those strengths about him are still present and still addressed. All of the strengths about Cornflower, you know, how she is very humble, very hardworking. Her, you know, identity is found a lot in how she can serve others, which is, I think, a very rare trait for a children's novel anyway. I feel like a lot of times the character that eventually becomes your protagonist's love interest, their entire personality is just, I like you. And I love that that is not Cornflower's end all be all, that she has very distinct capabilities, and she's, you know, very consistent to all characters. And, you know, she, like I said, she's very hardworking, very humble. She's always, you know, how can I help you? How can I help you? You know, characters like Constance and Basil Stagg Hare, like they're very much consistent characters. But the small moments, the ones that make their character feel real or relatable, some of those are missing in this TV show adaptation. I have to assume it just comes down to time again. But while these characters are not, it's hard to describe. I don't think the characters are lacking. I think they're not given the time to show us the depth of them, like we are given in the book. Maybe by the end of the season, again, I could change my opinion on this depending on how the next few episodes go or how the rest of the season goes. Perhaps those moments will come and we'll get that growth. But a lot of the characters do feel a bit like they're the same at the end of episode 4 as they are on episode 1, with the exception of maybe being a little more stressed out. Everybody's a little stressed out, which I think is understandable. But there's not a ton of growth. Now there's a lot of consistency, you know, and I'm not saying that anybody is like going backwards. But there's just not a lot of those, like, it's almost like you need those quiet moments to kind of like breathe with the character, and then you understand them. And we don't get a lot of that in the book or in the adaptation. This is a complaint I had about the book, and I think it's still actually a complaint here too. And it's the fact that a lot, really 90+% of Clooney's rat army are so interchangeable and forgettable. I can't really keep them straight. Clooney is obviously distinct, and I think Shadow is very distinct. And I also think that Shadow's character design is one of the creepiest things I've seen in as far as like character designs. So kudos to them for that, because they again nailed the description. But they're just so the same. Like, they all have different names, but I couldn't, if you showed me a picture of all of Clooney's rats from the 4 episodes we just watched and was like assign names to them, I wouldn't be able to tell you who was who. And that was again a complaint I had with the book. So it's still They didn't fix that with the adaptation. It's unfortunately still a problem. I think that another thing that again, in these 4 episodes, it's just not really super present, but it feels like the elder mice in the Abbey, particularly Methuselah and Father Abbott, but also Brother Alf, and there's one more whose name escapes me.
The friar, Hugo?
The friar, yes. So those 4, they feel like they've kind of fallen back onto the back burner in this adaptation. They're there, and of the 4 of them, I think Methuselah is still the most present because he has the most knowledge about the history of Redwall and the story of Martin the Great. And so he is required for a lot of that exposition that when they're starting to look for Martin's items. So he's there and he's used, but I feel like overall those elder mice have a bit less of a presence than they do in the book. And I hope that in future episodes that they are given their time to shine, because I think they're very wonderful characters and they're very wonderful mentor characters, and their presence and influence, not just on Matthias, but on everybody else at the Abbey, I think is a really important aspect in building the character relations that I think are so lovely in the book and so necessary for the feeling of, I guess, like unity and community that is present in all of the Abbey ally characters. And if they don't fill that role very well, I think it just won't feel quite as strong. Like that community may not feel as strong by the end of the season if they don't get that time to kind of like do that part of their job or that part of their role. So I was just a little disappointed, I guess, to see how they're not really talked about much. The last thing I want to talk about is the biggest problem. Okay, so everything about how the characters look is great. However, you cannot tell me that the wolf Selah is the same the fox Selah is the same size as Clooney the rat. Foxes are bigger than rats. Even a big rat compared to a small fox is gonna have a bit of difference. And the proportions of those foxes is so off. They are the world's tiniest foxes.
You could say the same thing about Constance, though.
That's true. She should be much bigger. And I also think Basil Staghair should be bigger. So there are proportion issues with some of these characters. Also, Asmodeus, I understand he's supposed to be a massive snake. But you're telling me he's like 5 times the size of a fox? How big is this guy? He's the world's largest snake, apparently.
Anaconda, apparently.
Or bigger. I don't know. What's bigger than that? I don't know. But, like, it's the proportion of animals compared to each other is crazy bad. Like, I was, like, looking at Selah in the tent with Clooney, and they were both standing, and they were, like, the same height. And I was like, there ain't no way that Clooney is this large, like, or, you know, there's just no way. So that's a big issue, I think. Well, that's all I had to say. So out of 3 points, 1.5 for me.
Okay. I also gave this 1.5 points out of 3. I will talk about the scale of animals in aesthetics because I think that fits more into that category than characters. So I will hold my comments for that section. Overall, I do think character designs are really good. I think the character designs are really consistent with what you would expect from reading the book. But even if you didn't read the books, I think it's very consistent in giving you a clear picture of who's on the good guy side and who's on the villain side. So all of the villainous rats look like rats. They physically look different than the mice. So it's easy to kind of differentiate between the two kind of sides of the story there. And then your general like woodland creatures like the voles or Basil when he pops in, they look pretty consistently like you should view them as either heroes or villains pretty quickly. When Sayla and Chicken Hound come into play, they look like this kind of maybe ambiguous, possibly villainous characters, and so they all physically, I think, their aesthetic design fits the internal characters that these people are supposed to be, if that makes sense. I think the voice acting is also really good in this show. I think I did not look up any of the cast. I couldn't really find a lot on the cast. But I do think Matthias is voiced by an actual child actor. If he's not, it sounds really convincing. Like it's a young boy voicing Matthias the mouse. I think his character is really consistent. He's an easy protagonist to root for. He's very eager at the beginning of the story. You can tell he's got a lot of courage and wants to be, you know, a good member of the Abbey community. He has a good sense of right and wrong. He's not perfect, but he's not flawed to the point of being an unlikable hero that needs this like massive comeuppance before he can have a redemption arc. He's just the protagonist who kind of steps in and is able to move forward for what's right and be this kind of heroic figure for your viewer to kind of latch onto and follow throughout. So I like him as a protagonist. I think he works very well, especially in a story where the plot is so condensed. We don't have a lot of time to like have him have this massive like fall from grace and then redemption when we are pushing through a story so quickly. However, I do think there's not a lot of growth in his character. He stays pretty one note throughout it, which all of his qualities are admirable, but in these first 4 episodes especially, it's very introductory. We're setting him up as to who he is, and we don't really watch a lot of growth or change in him. We're just watching things happen to him, and we're given introductions to him and most of the other characters as well, and we're revealing qualities of who they are. But there's not really a lot of change happening within these characters. I think that's the weakest part of the characters in the story, is that there's not a lot of development within these characters. They're just responding to the circumstances of their environment. The Abbot and Constance, I like how they kind of paired the two of them together through the majority of these first 4 episodes. Methuselah a little bit is kind of like the Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's kind of like the wise sage, but the Abbot and Constance, they kind of pair the two of them together, and they have this kind of maternal paternal role in Matthias's life and kind of as the Abbey as a whole. They're kind of like the father Abbot, and Constance is kind of like the mother abbess, but not really, like not literally, but she kind of fits into that more maternal role. And yet they both have differing opinion, which I like that they kept that consistent from the book, where Constance supports Matthias's desire to fight and support the Abbey, yet the Abbot is a pacifist, and yet the two of them come together and have this nice, very, very short, but a nice conversation with Matthias about the difference between fighting for justice and fighting for revenge. And so they kind of keep those same like moral compass notes that they have in the book, and so I appreciated that they kept that true to the characters of those two characters. Cornflower, I think, is actually more developed in this story than in the book. I think she's given a little bit larger role. She seems more of a companion to Matthias and kind of supporting him and helping him specifically in his individual goals versus just being this kind of assistant to the Abbey as a whole. We see her get to work in helping inventory food because we're under siege and we can't waste our inventory, and we have to be careful with our resources. And yet we get to watch her, help Matthias, kind of cover for Matthias while he's sneaking out, and then help him figure out where Martin's tomb is. And so I like that we've given her a little bit more development, and we've established them as really good companions that actually mesh well together, instead of her just being this kind of pretty face at the Abbey that does good things and has good qualities, but then we just kind of force her and Matthias together because they're both mice of the same age and opposite gender. So I appreciate that they kind of develop a little bit more of their relationship together, and I think that attention to that detail was needed. I don't think it was quite as well done in the book. I do think the villains overall, I kind of talked about this in plot, but I like that the villains have this nice balance of villainy and this like comedic relief as well, because you could have made this a very, very dark story. I think you could have made Clooney and his rats extremely inappropriate for a young audience if you wanted to, but I like that they have enough of these kind of bumbling stooges in Clooney's team to make it kind of worthwhile. But I actually don't agree that the rats are confusing. I think that they're actually better differentiated than the book. I don't think the book gives you a lot of physical qualities of these rats. It's just this rat with this name and this rat with this name, and we don't get any physical distinction between the two. But I do like that, Raggear is wearing blue, and he's, kind of scrawny, and, he has his one scene with him all by himself, and then he gets eaten by Asmodeus. And then we have Cheese Thief, who's a little bit more stout. He's wearing different colors. He has, kind of like a tear in his ear, and he's clearly like walking around as the second in command. And then we have, this other, so I think the rats are designed a little bit more to give us more distinction. So for me, I felt like I had an easier time distinguishing between the characters, but I would agree that they are all more or less the same person, just in a different like skin, if you will. So like, it's the same character. They're all kind of dumb and bumbling and self-serving, but I do think visually it helps me kind of distinguish between the two with that visual concept to kind of like tie into. But overall, I would say just in general, my critique of the characters in this story is that there's just not a lot of growth or change in these first 4 episodes, and we're like a third of the way through the show. And I think at this point, by episode 4, you should really start seeing a lot of growth and change. I think they attempted it with the Sparrow's Kingdom episode in episode 4. They attempted it with Warbeak in the fact that she's very violent, and then all of a sudden she realizes that Matthias kept his word and let her go home, and then she tells her mom like, no, he actually like kept his word and he was gonna free me, he wasn't gonna keep me captive in the Abbey. And I think it just happened so quickly it could be easily missed, especially given the dialogue differences between the sparrows and the mice. They don't speak in the same like dialect, and so it could be very difficult for a viewer to kind of follow the plot of that internal motivation of the sparrows. And I do agree that it does happen a lot quicker. But overall, I think the characters are pretty good. I think it's for what this show kind of sets your expectations up for. I think it's done pretty good, but I wouldn't say it's like the best characters in any TV show ever. And so that's why I couldn't give it full points. So half credit, 1.5 out of 3.
Okay, so our third category with TV shows is aesthetics, and we allow up to 2 points for this. And I actually gave this full points.
Really?
I think this is the best part of this adaptation so far. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because capturing the aesthetic of Redwall is really nicely captured in animation, particularly this like traditional 2D drawn animation style. I think that it's like, if you're gonna adapt Redwall, I almost feel like if they tried to adapt Redwall now and they did all these like CG animals or whatever, it would not have the same charm and effect as like traditional hand-drawn 2D animation did. And it's funny because when you think like PBS, like public show for children, you're not expecting like Disney level qualities of animation. And yet I think that this is maybe going to sound weird, but that small lack of perfection works in its favor, I think, because it adds this sort of storybook vibe to the animation, where like it literally feels like if you opened an illustrated version of Redwall and then pressed play on the picture, this is what you would see. And I think that it just captures that sort of I don't know how else to say it, is like that sort of like charm or magic of Redwall, and the world of Redwall is just really perfectly captured in this kind of animation. I think it's slightly dated in regards to like, you know, you can tell that it was drawn in the late 90s, but I don't think that that's a negative at all. I think it doesn't necessarily date it in the point of like where you're like, oh man, this is 90s, because it's a period piece anyway. It's taking place in what I would imagine could kind of be like medieval, but not quite. It's like kind of toward the end of that, you know, not quite into Renaissance, but it's obviously not modern. This is the story of Redwall doesn't take place in the 2000s with modern technology. So you don't need the technology of your animation to feel that forward. It has this perfect balance between like medieval action and like cute fluffy animals, because that juxtaposition is already kind of funny and fun at the same time, because it has a nice wide appeal for children. So you have little boys who just want to smack swords on each other. Cool. Well, you've got that in Redwall. And then you have these little, you know, Tea Party girls who just want to see cute fluffy animals. And that's also in Redwall. So you have this nice like wide appeal, you know, and all types of like children with all sorts of varying interests can find something nice about Redwall. I think it fits a lot of it checks a lot of boxes for a lot of children in that way. Obviously it's still nice for adults to watch too because of the storytelling, but I think especially with an animated show, you have to acknowledge that visually that's what's capturing your children's audience. Visuals have to come first in a child-based media, like a TV show, and then storytelling comes second. The nice thing about Redwall is that you do have a strong story, so it's a plus when the visuals are also appealing toward children, and just the nature of what Redwall is makes that very easy, just very easy to package and put on children's TV. I think the score is great. The opening song is great. It definitely feels indicative to the time while still being like memorable. And I mean indicative to the time that Redwall takes place, not indicative to the 90s. But it still feels like catchy in that sort of like earwormy way that like kids show openings were becoming at that point in time, where it was like, you know, you got to get a banger of an intro. And I think they established that well without it being an electronic pop song, you know? And so I think that was probably a difficult thing to hit, that balance, but I think they hit it. I also think that generally for a, you know, public animated TV show, a lot of the harder animated sequences are still animated really nicely. There are lots of action and fighting scenes, and those are animated quite nicely. They're very fluid. You know, the things like the weight of arrows and, you know, falling and stuff, it all seems to fit within like the scientifical bounds of this world. Everything feels based in reality, even in those things. And also the animation of like the dream sequences that take place in these episodes, particularly the nightmare that Clooney has about Martin the Warrior, and these sort of ideas. It's almost like, I guess they're not really like sleeping dreams, but more like these vision type things that Matthias has, where he believes that Martin is like speaking to him. Those are animated slightly different as well. They have sort of like that dreamy, hazy feel to them. And with hand-drawn animation, I'd imagine that that's a lot harder than, you know, 3D laying haze over something. So I appreciate the effort that's done in those sequences, and I think they're done really nicely. I also think things like the locations and sets are all drawn according to how they're described. There's a lot of consistency between scene to scene, especially with things like coloration and time of day taken into consideration, which it would have been really easy for them to not take those things into consideration, because like what 8-year-old watching PBS cares about those sorts of things, but they still took that time, and it wouldn't have really affected the story too much either way. But overall, I think the aesthetics are really, really, really nice, and are the biggest appeal of this adaptation, in my opinion. So full points, 2 out of 2 for aesthetics.
Alrighty. I actually gave this 1.5 points out of 2 for aesthetics. I agree with the majority of the points you had. I had a lot of them written down as well, so I won't recap all of them. I think the music really of the introduction, like theme song or like the opening, it's not really credits, really sets the tone for the rest of the storytelling. I think the intro is pretty iconic, and if you watch any of the rest of the series, it's also the same like theme music is used for all 3 seasons. So it just sets the tone for this like you said, kind of like medieval Renaissance-ish time period, and it feels very timeless. So it feels like you could show this TV show to any kid in any generation and they will identify with it, and it won't have that feel as if it's, oh, this is a 90s TV show.
Yeah.
Versus if you show a kid a show like, I don't know, like The Magic School Bus, it's going to feel like it came from the 90s because it was very true to that time. And I like that this has more of that timeless classic literature feel of the visuals. I do really like the hand-drawn animation. I like how the tapestry also that has there's almost texture to it that looks like a tapestry, and the kind of tapestry snapshots, if you will, help open and close the story. So we feel like when this show aired weekly, if you couldn't remember what happened last week, you could get a little recap that's just a visual recap without having like a previously on Avatar.
Yeah.
With, clips of the prior episode. It's just this like visual snapshot that really wraps it up nicely and concisely. And that also will give you a little bit of foreshadowing of like what may happen in the next episode. So like, for example, at the end of Clooney the Scourge Part 1, you see Shadow climbing up the wall of the building, and that kind of gives you some nice foreshadowing and builds tension, where Clooney the Scourge Part 2 pretty much opens up with Shadow climbing up the building and to steal the tapestry of Martin the Warrior. I like how they mix some animal sounds in with the voice acting. So like the sparrows, they'll have bird sounds of like birds crying with that voice acting. The otters have like barks that will make sound, and then the characters do still speak. So I like that they have a little bit of that vocalization. The only thing with the animation, I did notice that they did reuse some cells, if you will. When the rats are charging towards the gate of the abbey, they reuse a clip there. And as a kid, you don't really care, but as an adult, it's a little obvious that they've just reused these same frames of rats running towards the castle. And I was like, well, you can't be, can't win it every time.
Sure.
But the other thing is I took into consideration the scale of the animals into aesthetics. I do think the scale of the foxes is terrible. I think that personally, overall, I like that they kind of make the mice a little bigger and make the badgers and the hares and the otters a little smaller, because realistically, a badger could eat a mouse. I mean, in one bite. And to me, I don't think it logistically works to make them all true to scale, because then these creatures don't seem like they can all live within the same space. If they're performing human tasks like cooking in a kitchen, you can't have a countertop tall enough for a badger and then a table that's really short for a mouse. I mean, you could, and maybe it would be really cute and it would work really nicely. But I think for a TV show this quick paced, you don't have time to fit in all of those logistics. I think in Brian Jakes' original novel, the original Redwall novel does kind of assume these animals are at a realistic scale. So like Constance pulls a cart in the first book, which doesn't really happen again, but I think the inference is that she is a large animal that's much bigger than these mice, and so she can pull a cart the way a horse could pull a cart for a human. And that is not continued in the rest of the series because I think that the bigger animals are kind of shrunk down a little bit, and the smaller animals are kind of enlarged so that they can all interact with each other within the same world. So obviously your otters, your hares, your badgers are going to be taller, like physically taller, but then your mice, your voles, your moles, they're going to be physically shorter. And I think the scale of this show with those creatures specifically is done really well, but I do think the foxes should be closer to the size of Constance or Basil Staghair instead of the same size as Clooney. And I'd like that the rats are physically bigger than the mice because rats are bigger than mice in real life, and it does make your villains more intimidating and imposing. But when you're looking at a fox right next to a rat and they're the same size, it is really comical even. It doesn't make your foxes look threatening or sinister. And I do think in general the character design of those foxes seem more like happy-go-lucky cartoon characters instead of these like ambiguously
suspicious,
sly, crafty villains. And so I do think the character design of the foxes was not what I would have hoped them to be, and I think that the size of them was just missed in that. But I also understand, you're assuming that Sayla and Chicken Hound are going into Clooney's tent. Well, if they're way too big, they can't go into his tent. His tent's going to be to scale for him. It's going to be too small. None of their equipment is going to be the right size to heal for him. So I understand that maybe they made that decision because, well, we have Sayla in the tent with Clooney. Clooney's laying on the bed. We can't draw this big, massive like tent that's the size of a cathedral so that the fox can fit in this tent, and then why would a rat carry a tent around that big just in case a bigger animal needs to come in there? So it logistically, you could find so many more plot holes, I think, if they did have all the animals true to their actual scale. But personally, it didn't really bother me at all until you get to the foxes, and then I just think that they should not have been that small. They should have been bigger than the mice and bigger than the rats, the same way that like Basil and Constance are. Mm-hmm. Even the otters, they're just taller because otters are really long. Like they have a long torso. And so the otters, when they stand on their hind legs, are just physically taller. But otherwise, I think the aesthetics are really, really nice. It's kind of cozy. So I gave it 1.5 points out of 2.
Okay. So our fourth category, next to last, is always personal taste and preference, and we allot 2 points for this. And I went back and forth a lot on this one because I was not a Redwall kid growing up, but I ended up putting full credit and giving it 2 out of 2 points because I think, my critiques aside, I think that number one, I'm surprised I didn't watch this as a kid. I think I must have just missed it, or there was something else at the time that had my attention more, or whatever. I don't know. I did watch some PBS growing up. Like, it's not like I was absent from the realm, but for some reason I just missed this show. Surprised I didn't watch it as a kid. I really want to watch the rest, including the next seasons, which I know are based on books that I haven't read yet. But it's super easy to watch, and I think overall it really does capture Redwall in a really nice, palatable, easy to consume way that doesn't feel like it's a joke version of Redwall either. I had my critiques, I talked about them, but I think at its core, it's still the same. There's nothing, and again, this is only 4 episodes in. Hopefully my opinion wouldn't change moving forward. But like at its core, it's still what it is. And there's nothing that's missing that really detriments something about the storytelling or any of the characters or their involvement. So there's no huge detriments. And I think because of that, it really has encapsulated Redwall in a nice way and makes me want to watch more. So I ended up doing 2 points out of 2 for personal taste.
I'm surprised.
I was too.
I'm surprised. I also gave this 2 out of 2. It's not really a surprise. I did not have cable TV growing up, so PBS was the only children's entertainment that I watched that was not a DVD from the library or a VHS tape from the library. I had not seen the show. I have not rewatched the show since I was in the age demographic when it aired. And I have fond memories of setting the VCR on Sunday mornings and watching the show after church when I got home. And I was surprised to see it hold up. And I had almost as much fun watching it as I did when I was a kid. So that may be why you didn't watch it growing up, because at least in our region of the U.S., it aired on Sundays at like 11 a.m.
Maybe.
So
I would have never been home at that time.
Yep, and so we literally had like a VCR and a blank videotape, and I would set the VCR to record from 11 to 11:30, and I will never forget one of the most critical episodes in the show did not air because they were having a telethon. And my entire life, to this day, I have never seen that missing episode.
Of
Redwall. So
well, I guess you're going to see it soon then.
Yeah, so
you gotta watch it now.
We can watch it, I can actually rewatch that episode. So, but yeah, they were doing a telethon and I went play on the VCR and I just almost broke down in tears because like the most important episode of the show did not air on PBS, and
That's
it didn't
awful.
re-air, so they would have reruns, but I never saw the re-airing of it.
Dang.
So yeah, yep. But I did grow up. I loved Redwall. I loved the books. The TV show actually introduced me to the books, so I'd seen the TV show first, and I was the kid growing up that like loved the Middle Ages and like fought with swords in the backyard, and like so Redwall was right up my alley. It was exactly what like I wanted at that age. It scratched the itch, and I was very pleasantly surprised that it still really holds up as a good like children's TV show. It does have its flaws. It has its objective missteps here and there, but I think overall I still enjoy it very, very much. So 2 out of 2.
All right. So our final category is creativity, and we allot 1 point for this, and I gave this a full point. I think that this was a nice, fresh show for the era of PBS because I do not recall, to my memory, and, you know, you were a bit more knowledgeable about PBS in this era than I was, but I don't recall many shows like this on PBS at the time. I remember lots of school skill shows that focused on reading and math and science and history and things like that. And those were good shows. I'm not trying to say any of those were wrong, but this Redwall itself being a fictional adventure epic, I don't think there was anything like this on PBS at the time. And I think that it brings a freshness to when I think back, like nostalgically on that era, it feels different, but also fits. Like it fits, but it's different. And I think that is really nice. And I think that knowing that Redwall as a series has such a large world and fans that are loyal and devoted, and knowing that this was an internationally like attributed show, I think it's really nice to see that, and to see, so when our Redwall episode went up, after we talked about it, we had people engaging with that episode, and from, you know, I don't know, age ranges or whatever, but like I always get excited when we talk about a topic that gets engagement, which is why we always tell you to like engage with us, because it makes us excited and it makes us want to talk about things more or things related to it more. So hacks for you. But I got excited when we got engagement, because then I was like, now I want to know more about it, because I know that there's people out there that love this. And so, you know, if we can talk about something that you love, that we also love, like it's a win-win for everybody involved. And so I just enjoyed that sort of like understanding that like this was very iconic to a lot of people. This was very milestone-y to a lot of people. And with it being same but different on PBS, I think is just a really nice factor to consider as well. So 1 point out of 1 for creativity.
Alrighty. So I also gave this full points for creativity. I think it's very rare. Basically for the very similar reasons that you gave credit. I think it's very rare to see a 90s to 2000s adaptation be so faithful to a book series that still holds up in entertainment value over 25 years later. So most TV, especially like PBS, was strictly educational, like you said. More like Magic School Bus, I think, is an iconic show of like the 90s, 2000s era of television, probably closer to the 90s. And then shows that were maybe geared towards older kids were
Something
things
like
like
Zoom.
yeah, or like Fetch with Ruffman, if you watch that one. So more live children featured on these shows, or like Cyber Chase or Arthur. Like those, Arthur was probably the one that was like a slice of life style,
Yeah.
more like a sitcom style to kind of teach you life lessons versus like teaching you math or teaching you science or reading.
It's like more moral lessons sitcom.
Yeah. Life lessons.
Yeah.
Navigating relationships, interpersonal relationships, things like that. And this was actually a book developed into a TV show. And honestly, for like public broadcast television, I can't think of an educational TV show or a TV show that was broadcast within the target of an educational show that was actually just an adaptation of a book.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, there have been TV shows like way before, like, I think I was too young to remember, where they would adapt stories like Eloise or Angelina Ballerina or Spot the dog for like really, really young ages, or, traditional classic children's picture books, and they would kind of like animate them and like read the book to you.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I don't really recall a lot of TV shows that were strictly like an adaptation of a fantasy childhood novel that is this beefy. Picture books, often, yes. Like, because you can take a picture book and you can condense it.
And they're very
into,
palatable. Yeah.
Right. And the illustrations are kind of already there. You just copy those illustrations. This was done from scratch. I mean, there are kind of like thumbnail size sketches in the chapter headings, but there are no illustrations in Redwall. It's kind of left up to your imagination. So I think this show came out definitely being targeted for a young audience, and it came out before book adaptations in TV were really a mainstream concept. I think that I'm not saying that Redwall did it first in the sense that like film and TV,
right?
They have been adapting books and movies, but this is such a niche market for that to be developed. We have the YA book craze hit in 2000s, 2010s, but for it to be children's literature designed for children in a TV format rather than a movie or direct to DVD or direct to video format, this is a pretty rare find in children's media. So I think just the fact that it was so unusual and still is pretty unusual. I'm not in the loop of kids TV shows today, but
yeah, I couldn't tell you anything that's on the Disney Channel now.
The pacing of Redwall is just still not, it's not even the style that's being done anymore. The traditional animation, the pacing of that, this is like a long form narrative versus each episode being an individual story. Things like that, I think it's such a rare find. And I would say that in general, it's a pretty iconic TV show and is kind of an underground thing. I haven't met a ton of fans of Redwall, but I think a lot of kids that grew up reading it as adults now are like, oh man, I remember Redwall. That was such a good time of your childhood. But it's very rare you find like adult fan clubs fanning over Redwall. But I don't know, we may find something different when this episode publishes. So, but full credit for creativity. I think it's just very milestone and iconic and very unusual, and it's successful even in being that unusual.
I agree.
So, what was your final score for Redwall episodes 1 through 4?
My final score is 7.5.
Wow.
And if I did the math correctly, I think yours is 7.
It is.
Yeah. The only thing that we were different about was aesthetics by half a point.
Yeah, definitely. So no, I'm very surprised that yours is that high.
Well, I liked it.
Good. I'm glad you did. It makes me glad I picked the topic.
Yeah.
So this is my plan all along, is to pick the
Turn
TV
me
show.
into a Redwall kid.
Yes, I'm going to turn Tori into a Redwall fan. Any final thoughts?
Nope. I really want to watch the rest. So here we go.
We're going to stop recording and go watch the rest.
Yeah.
Okay. What was of these 4 episodes, which episode was your favorite?
Maybe the beginning. I think the first
The
one.
very first episode?
Yeah, with Matthias's created backstory.
Yeah.
I think that was good.
Yeah.
It was a good start.
I think Treachery was my favorite episode. So episode 3.
That's the first siege, right? On the Abbey.
Yeah. And it was when the foxes come in and like stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite or a least favorite character and or? Who was your favorite and least favorite character?
I answered this question about the book, and I think my answers were Constance and maybe Jess the squirrel. Jess is not
your
present.
favorites?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jess is not as present in these episodes. She does exist and do her part in episode 4, but I think I would say Constance, but also honorary mention to Cornflower, because like you said, she does shine better. She's a stronger character earlier on in this adaptation. So shout out to Cornflower.
Yeah. Who's your least favorite?
Chicken Hound. He sucks.
Yeah, he's pretty bad.
Yeah.
It's a pretty bad dude.
Yeah.
I think my favorite character is Matthias, as always. He's my favorite. And then probably my least favorite. I think Ragier is annoying. He's the one that gets eaten by Asmodeus.
Well, he deserved it.
So annoying. He's like, there were 50 of them, Chief. And he's like, there were 100 of them, Chief. There were 1,000,000 of them. And then he gets eaten.
Yeah.
He's so annoying.
So annoying.
So it makes you happy when he gets eaten because he's so annoying.
Everybody's had the coworker like that.
Yeah. Yeah. We've all had a Ragier.
Not to say that we wish that our coworkers would get eaten by snakes, but
yeah,
you know what I mean. Just annoying.
What character do you wish was present in these episodes that was not featured?
The only characters that I can think of that aren't featured are characters that come in the third act.
Well, like you mentioned, like how Brother Alf really isn't.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so I mean, like that, like characters
like
that would
I
be
wish
present.
I had more time with.
Yes.
Yeah, people like Brother Alf or the Friar, or even like Formal. Like he had his moment, but it would have been nice to get a little more from him. And Jess Squirrel. She's present in episode 4, but her husband and son are not at all. Which the baby squirrel is the first one that we see in the book, that we meet in the book.
Yeah,
and
Silent Sam.
Yeah, and he's not present at all yet. So maybe the whole squirrel family too.
Yeah.
So
I think Ambrose Spike is technically featured.
I think he's seen, but I don't know if he has any lines.
He doesn't do it, and I like him a lot. So.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I think I just liked him as a kid. I thought he was a cool dude, like in there making the cordials and stuff. So, but yeah, I wish he had a little more screen time.
Yeah.
And then Jess, I always like Jess too.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think was maybe it can be either the best, or you can either view this as the best and worst, or you can view this as your favorite and least favorite adaptation from the book?
I think the moment that I think is the best adapted is when the picture of Martin the Great is removed from the tapestry and taken. I thought that sequence was done really well. My least favorite adaptation moment is I would say just how little time it felt we got to spend with the sparrows. I wish that had been stretched into 2 episodes. I think that would have made me a lot more satisfied than I was with that episode.
Yeah. I think the best adaptation for me personally, I think the best adaptation is the very beginning of episode 1 when Matthias is in the corridor and he trips and drops all like the nuts and hears Martin talking to him. I think just visually it's very well done, and like even the sound design of how it sounds like super echoey, like he's in this huge abbey all by himself.
His little sandals going or whatever.
Yeah, and like the sun coming through the windows, and like he hears Martin's voice, and it like sounds like echoey. And then least favorite or worst adaptation. This is gonna sound so harsh, but I think when the rats attack the abbey. And like the people are shooting arrows down at them, and then these like rando otters and these like knightly looking checkered like hoods and shields are like, and they come out and like stand there, and then Matthias and the voles like run between them. I'm like, it just looks so lame. Like that doesn't make any sense. And, like the rats are like, hold on, we can't shoot at them because they're standing there. Like,
yeah,
I just felt like it just wasn't executed very well. So
that's fair.
But no hate, just objectively, I thought it was just a little goofy. Do you have a favorite or least favorite like visual adaptation, like something that looked like you expected or didn't look like you expected? Like if there's a character design you didn't like, or maybe a character design you really thought was spot on. Or
I think
the physical, like,
I really liked the way it was exactly how it was in my head. And even though we didn't even talk about this sequence, but it is a sequence that doesn't happen until the end of the book, and it was in episode 3, is when they dig the tunnel to come up into the inside of the Abbey courtyard, and then they pour like scalding hot porridge into it, and it chases all the rats out. That was exactly how my brain pictured it, and so seeing it like animated was really satisfying, because I was like, that's exactly how it should have looked and how it did look in my head. So I thought that was really good. One thing that did not look like how I pictured it is the sequence where the voles are kind of overtaken by the rats in the forest. In my head, I thought that they were like in an open field kind of situation. Maybe it was changed and I don't remember that detail, but I definitely did not remember or picture it being like in a woods and they were kind of just like casually moving along or whatever. So that was much different than how I pictured it.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite visual adaptations is probably the scene where Basil is like taunting all the rats and Matthias is trying to save the voles. I think that just like follows suit of the book very well. Least favorite, I think visually this might get some hate. I think Shadow as a character is done really well, but I felt like the characters that you kind of expect to be sort of like lit darkly and like in shadow, meaning so like Shadow specifically and Asmodeus as well, they just to me visually look very bright. Like
that's
their
fair.
pigment is just very like they're very true colors, and I'm like, I wish it was like visually a little bit more shadowy, like more cinematic, I guess.
Yeah.
Like when Shadow, like Clooney calls for Shadow and he like walks around beside him, I think you literally watch like the animated character just go like do, 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 do. And I'm like, oh, it would have been so better if he just kind of like slid over there and was like kind of like slithery looking and like that seemed like he just like appeared and materialized out of the shadows instead of just like
walking over.
Yeah. But you're limited with the animation style. So, but that one I was like, in my head, I just picture this very like visually like scary stuff. But
Yeah.
I'm also not 10 anymore, so maybe when I was 10 it would have been pretty intense.
Maybe.
Who or what, maybe who, character, what scene, what point of the story are you most excited to see next?
I'm not gonna lie. When I don't remember the characters' names, but toward the end, spoilers if you don't want them. Toward the end, when Matthias meets the owl and the cat, I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah.
And the shrews.
Mhm.
Yeah, that whole section, I'm really excited to see.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, the final battle with Asmodeus. So I'm looking forward to that scene as well. What children's story or media would you like to see adapted in this style?
That's a hard question because I feel like so many of the things that I grew up were adapted at some point.
Can I give you my answer?
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see an animated version of A Series of Unfortunate Events.
Oh, that would be really cool. I was thinking animated Narnia.
That would be cool too.
Yeah.
That
like
would be really
like
cool.
2D animation style Narnia.
Yeah.
Because there are some illustrations in the book, but they're just black and white sketch illustrations.
Illustrations are pretty iconic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that way you could use those as reference points, you know, good illusions, and build from there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Cool.
And I always think about Narnia in the winter time,
Mm-hmm.
which this episode will come out in the winter.
Yes.
So I always think about Narnia. Narnia is just such a wintry series. Even the books that take place
in
summer, that just overall Narnia feels like a wintry place to me.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Alrighty. Any final thoughts?
I've said all I have.
Alrighty. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. We hope you had a good time. We know we did. If you have an idea of what you would like us to review next, you can leave us a comment down on our YouTube channel.
Engage with us.
A comment on Spotify. You can engage with us on any of our social medias. And there's also a submission form on our website at lineandmouthpodcast.com. You can also find our show notes, link to the content where you can watch Redwall too. If we put links to that on our website as well. Links to our socials, Patreon, all kinds of fun stuff there. If you'd like to support us in that way, you're welcome to. The biggest support, though, that you can do for us, honestly, I know you probably hear every podcaster say it, but leaving us a 5-star review, or really any review, we don't care if it's 5-star, but leaving us a review and, writing a comment, giving this video a thumbs up, sharing it with a friend. It just algorithmically, it helps us reach more people, helps other people find us, find what they like. But yeah, we're always open to suggestions. We love hearing from you guys, and we will catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.